All right, ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers, we're back with Kashub, historian Danite. He's going to be going into part two of his lesson. You guys saw part one of the American and African slavery involved in the history. It's a thorough presentation that he gave. Got a lot of good feedback with that. So we thank Kashub. He's back with part two tonight. So first I say shalom, shalom to you, good brother Kashub. Looking forward to the presentation. And if you would you please start with part two of your lesson, good brother?
Okay, shalom, shalom. Can I be heard?
Loud and clear.
Alright, cool. Let me know if anything. We're going to start off first and foremost, giving honor and praise to the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. Last time when we did this presentation, we spoke in reference about the fact that the date that's given as 1619 is not the accurate date for the start of black people being enslaved in what we call today the United States. In this introduction, I want to first off state that the United States of America, by name, came to be in the year 1776. Therefore, the time before that was the time of the colonies. You understand, the 13 colonies, if you will. And one of the things to be noted is that the first colony that was established was in the year 1607. Now, I have here the list of the dates of the 13 colonies in which they started. And remember that the United States came to be in its legal definition in the year 1776. Now, in light of that, let's go over when the 13 colonies started in date. Pennsylvania was in 1681. New Jersey was in 1664. New York, also in the year 1664. North Carolina in 1653. Delaware in 1638. South Carolina in 1663. Georgia, 1732. New Hampshire, 1638. Massachusetts, in the year 1630. Rhode Island and Connecticut, in the year 1636. And Maryland, in 1663. So, one of the things to point out is this. In the year 1658, you will know, brothers and sisters, that there were people who we understand as the Native Americans, as well as people that we understand as black people, who were fighting for freedom in the year 1658, which leads into a couple of things. One, slavery existed in the same land. And what I just said in 1658 was in what we call Connecticut of today. One of the other things to point out is before what became known as the United States, slavery already existed in those places. Now, prior to the colonies being set up, in the dates that we just went over for the 13 colonies, the people who were enslaving black people prior to that were the Spaniards and the Dutch. And you will find out that the French was in on it too, in part. Because in the year prior to even all of the dates that we spoke of, in the 1530s, namely in 1534, there was a guy that was of the French people, because we said we was going to go over the French and the Spanish issue in this presentation. A guy named Jacques, that they said founded, or that is to say, quote unquote, discovered the place that we call Canada today. So one of the things to sit there and let it be noted and understood is that you will see, brothers and sisters, when you get the book Black Cargoes and read it within your own time, that the Dutch, the English, the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese, they had forts built in Western Africa for the trading of black people as slaves. And they actually vied against each other, that is to say, going against each other in order to sit there and maintain these forts that they had as such. When the British dominated the slave trade in the 18th century and then attempted to stop to the best of their quote-unquote ability the issue that we call the Middle Passage or the Atlantic literal slave trade of people being shipped from Western Africa all the way to the Western Hemisphere by ships. When they decided in 1807 or 1808 to put a law to stop that, that did not stop it totally, because we know good and well understand that there was still trading of people via the slave trade and slave ships after that particular date. So that's something to be noted and understood. Now, I want to go and cross-reference, if we will. And for those who may be listening, may say, oh, he's talking a little different in tone. Nah, just getting up into this moment right here, so that way we can get into the moment. Let's go, if you will. I have a book here. It is entitled A History of the American People. Now, unfortunately, I'm not able to show the cover because the cover's off, but I am able to show, brothers and sisters, can I be heard?
Loud and clear.
Okay, I'm trying to adjust the camera to be able to sit there and show the picture of the book I'm speaking of. Seems to not be working on the camera aspect on my end, at least. All right, well, I will just cite the book. Sorry about that inconvenience. And I want to sit there and point out that in this particular book, we're going to go at page 4 and 5. We did last time, but it's important to do it concerning what we're about to indulge into. Okay? And it says the following. In the 1440s, exploring the African coast for their newly acquired islands, the Portuguese rediscovered slavery as a working commercial institution. Then he goes on to say in page 5, the Portuguese entered the slave trade in the mid-15th century, took it over, and in the process transformed it into something more impersonal and horrible than it had been either in antiquity or medieval Africa. Now, the same author of the same book, remember, he spoke about the Portuguese doing what they did in the 1400s, right? The same author in the same book mentions this concerning the 1619 date that we're going to get into. It says the following. 3 weeks later, on August 20th, John Wolfe recorded in his diary the third notable event of the year, and that is speaking about the year 1619. And I want to read it verbatim, part of my language. There came in a Dutch man of war that sold us 20 negars. He did not state the price, but added that 15 blacks were bought by Yardley himself. You can look this up on Google. The guy's name was Yardley, Y-A-R-D-L-E-Y. He was the appointed governor of the colony of Virginia in that time. And here's what it says about this guy here. All right? By the name Sir George Yardley. 15 blacks were bought by Yardley himself for work on his 1,000-acre tobacco plantation in Flowerdew Hundred. These men were unfree, though not strictly speaking, slaves. Then he goes on to say that they were indentured servants. Now, one of the things as a brother who studies this kind of subject that I personally, in my reasoning and study, and I will state why, with evidence as such, that I do not employ the word or the term indentured servitude or indentured servants. Reason being is because the people that were called, quote unquote, indentured servants were flogged, were beaten, were sold, were raped, were kidnapped. The slaves were sold, raped, kidnapped, beaten. There are records of people who you will consider to be, quote unquote, indentured servants who ran away from their slave masters or their masters. Now, if indentured servants were not treated bad or were not on the status socially as a slave, then you would not have records of people who are considered indentured servants running away. So let that be noted and understood. Very important. All right? The scriptures in the book of Deuteronomy, the 23rd chapter, verses 15 to 17 in the Old Testament, it teaches us that if a slave runs away from his master, that you're not supposed to return him. The Code of Hammurabi says the opposite, basically saying if a slave runs away from his master and you hold that person and harbor the runaway slave, that's a death penalty. So the cultures are already different. You understand? So let that be noted and understood. Now, this is something special that they say concerning this guy, Sir George Yardley, the governor of Virginia, a colony, in the year 1619. Some are recorded as having done so. What was more ominous, however, was the success with which Yardley and other landowners used blacks to work their tobacco plantations. Now, here's the point I want to make in what I just read. It says concerning the date of 1619, 1620, that there were 20 black people brought over as servants or slaves, to put it in the actual content of it. Now, it says that that guy, Governor Yardley, brought 15 of the 20 people that was brought over to Jamestown, Virginia. So if that's the case, that leaves only 5 other people of those that were sold to the guy John Wolfe. In light of that, how do you have Yardley and other Virginia colonists having such great success with their black slaves on the tobacco plantations? Obviously, there were other people who were sold besides the one that John Wolfe recorded. That's how. So these are certain of the things that we want to point out that perhaps people don't think that others will study into or make the analogy with or get into the dating aspect. Because as stated in part 1, and I want to say it slower this time, that the American society, or what we will call today the United States, was founded in 1776. So now, in that light, they try to wash their hands of what evil the colonists did, because they don't call themselves the colonists in the colonies no more. You understand? So, they're now called the United States. Then, when the colonies, at the dates that were given, dating anywhere from 1607 all the way to the time of when Georgia became one, as stated in the year 1732, they can sit there and say, oh, we didn't do what the Dutch and the French did. So the colonists are trying to wash their hands of the Dutch, the French, and the Spanish wickedness that was done to black people in the same land that we call the United States today. Then the United States of America is trying to wash their hands of the wickedness that the colonists did from the era of the 1619, 1620 era all the way to the 1730s. So we have to sit back, know, and understand that there are people, as the saying goes, they are throwing the rock and then trying to hide their hands behind their back and said, I didn't do nothing. And so one of the things to point out is this now has to be known and shown. All right? So let's continue on in this presentation here. It says the following. Soon they were buying, they, the colonists that is, this is coming from the book for those following. I'm reading Paul Johnson, A History of the American People on page 27. And it says the following. Soon they were buying more men and not indentured laborers either, but chattel slaves. Thus, in 1619, the first English colony in America embarked on two roads which bifurcated, bifurcated, and led to two totally different directions. Representative institutions leading to democratic freedoms and the use of slave labor, the quote-unquote peculiar institution of the South, as it was to be called. So the point of me reading those particular sentences there is to point out a couple of things. If there were 20 black people sold to John Wolfe by the Dutch in 1619, and of those 20, the guy Sir George Yardley got 15 of them, yet Yardley and other Virginian colonists had, as stated here, great success with the black people who were being enslaved. That means there had to have been more black people bought and sold and shipped to what we call Virginia today, other than what John Wolfe recorded. So that's one of the things to point out. So that collaborates a couple of things in what we're speaking on. As stated in the year 1658, you had it to where black people and Native Americans were actually coming together in what we call the state of Connecticut to go against their enslavers and their slave masters. So to land back on what we did earlier in the week, where they trying to sit there and post the lion meme about Anthony Johnson and he being the pioneer of American slavery, how in the world can that be when you had already people trying to go against slavery just 3 years after his court's decision? Mind you, he's in Virginia, Anthony Johnson. The other people I spoke of in the state of Connecticut. So we have to then know and understand that once it comes down to studying this kind of matter, it's very critical to understand the dating, the ethnic origin of these slave masters, and those who attempt to wash their hands by changing the name of a place. Just the same thing that was done in ancient Egypt. You understand, with the children of Israel being enslaved in there. Okay, the place that was called Rorati and then later on called Peru Nefer, the Egyptians going to change the name to Pira Amses. And so now, when the Greeks later on came and called that same land the land of Avaris, we're just going to sit there and now just try to eliminate any kind of memory of there being any slaves in there. You see, so that right there is very, very important to let that be noted and understood. When you change the name of a place, you are indirectly trying, maybe it's not even in malice, but you are indirectly trying to change the history of that same place by changing the name of a place. You understand? Just the same, if a woman gets married to a man, her name changes. She's at a new status. She's in a different level in her life. You understand? If a person decides to change his or her own name, he or she is doing that for their own particular reason. They are trying to change something about themselves. So is it the same when people name lands and change the name of the lands. You see, so it's not really too hard to figure out certain things. So, alrighty, let's move on, if you will. I have a book here entitled, I'm sorry for those following, because I'm not able to get the picture put up on my phone. But I want to sit there and go over a particular thing. The book called Black Cargoes, written by Daniel Mannix in collaboration with William Coley. We quoted this book a little bit in the last presentation, but I want to go over certain pages in this particular one, if you will. All right? And as stated, I apologize for not being able to show the picture, but I'm reading from the book Black Cargoes on page 27. It says the following. During the long wars between Spain and Holland, the coast of Guinea was harried by Dutch raiders. In the year 1630, a Dutch fleet captured Pernambuco, then the chief port of Brazil, and the Dutch extended their control over the northern half of the colony. Now, this right here distinctly says that in the year 1630 that the Dutch took over the place that they call Pernambuco, which is over in the place called Brazil of today. You understand? If we remember from the last presentation that you had black people that were shipped to the United States as slaves from Brazil. All right, we went over that last time. And it says this. In the year 1626, the French built the fort of St. Louis on the sandy peninsula between Senegal River and the ocean. The English first built a fort at Coromantine on the Gold Coast in the year 1631, but later they captured the originally Swedish fort of Cape Coast Castle, not far distant, and made it their principal trading center. Then the author goes on to say the following, says this. Another English center was James Fort, near the mouth of the Gambia, which, except for the Senegal, was the only West African river navigable for the considerable distance of seagoing vessels. So I just wanted to sit there and point this particular part out, that we was going to go over the issue with Spain and France in this particular presentation. Now, it goes on to say the following, right? Following the law. Same book we're reading from, Black Cargoes, now on page 29. Can I be heard?
Loud and clear.
Thanks you, brother. It says the following. For a time, the slave trade was chiefly in Dutch hands, but the English did not abandon the struggle. They started building a new chain of forts, and in 1672, they founded the Royal African Company to maintain the forts in return of a monopoly of the trade. So I just want to sit there and have this to be noted and read for edification purposes. All right, so one of the things, if we continue to go on in this presentation, right? Same book. We're going to go to Black Cargoes on page 32 and read part of it. Okay, and here's what it says. To suggest the immensity of this traffic, meaning during the slave trade, here are a few figures. In the years from 1575 to 1591, 52,000 slaves were sent from Angola alone to Brazil and the Spanish Indies. Now, when it says the Spanish Indies, we're speaking about the place called today Jamaica, Dominican Republic / Haiti, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. Okay? It says the following. With the shipments rising to an average of more than 5,000 a year by the end of this period. So that means that on average, 5,000 more than 52,000 gives you 57,000. So that means as the years went on and on and on, they wound up having more and more people concerning the slave trade and what was going on. 57,000 yearly by the end of that period. They continue to rise, and by 1617, 28,000 slaves were being shipped annually from Angola and the Congo. From 1680 to the year 1700, 300,000 slaves were shipped in English vessels alone. Now, that is to say from the year 1680 all the way to the year 1700. That's only 20 years. So the English took 300,000 people as slaves, according to the record left here, within 20 years. You understand? Now, keep your hand there for those who are able to follow. And let's remember, brothers and sisters, that in the year 1605, you had it to where Barbados became a major port for the English concerning the slave trade. All right? So that means that in a year, according to Suzanne Everett in her book, History of Slavery, that the ports began to really open in the year 1627 in Barbados. So for those who are familiar with geography or sailing or navigation, they know that Barbados is the closest distance to get to when you're in a ship from Western Africa. So many, as stated, within 20 years, we're talking as many as 300,000. Let's continue on, just by the English. From 1680 to the year 1688, brace yourself for this one because this is just 8 years, right? The Royal African Company had 249 slavers. Now, I wish I could show this on the camera, but I can't. But what we're reading of when we see slavers, it is talking about the ships themselves. So that means from 1680 all the way to 1688, we're talking about the average number of 249 slave ships by the one thing alone that is referred to as the Royal African Company. And this Royal African Company that was set up by the people that we call the English in the year 1672. So from 1672, when they started it, they really got their hands in there, if you want to use that terminology, from 1680 to 1688 with 249 slave ships. Let's move on. Then it says the following. And these embarked 60,783 slaves. Only 46,396 of whom survived the voyage. So they're saying that within 8 years they took 6,783 black people as slaves. And of the people that survived that voyage was 46,396. From 60 to 46 is a distance of 14. So we're talking over 14,000 people that did not survive in the 8 years between the Royal African Company operated by the British in the West Indies bringing black people as slaves over. This is the kind of things that they try to tell us. Don't sit there and think about history. Don't sit there and talk about history. Forget about the past and so forth and so on. But for those who know better, you know good and well, if you as a brother or a sister or as a person, if you beat somebody up, you want that person to not remember because you realize that you are worthy of them tribally trying to get back at you. Now, let me state for the record, I am not endorsing violence because the Most High, the Creator, will sit there and deal with our cause. You understand? So there will not be, for black people, no offense intended, what we call reparations in the form of a check or money or anything of that sort. Because the violence that was done to us, if you will, before we continue reading the figures. Let me give you an example. They used to take black people that was in the Spanish Caribbean. That is by speaking, we're not talking about New Spain. Because New Spain, set up by the people after Bartolome Las Casas, included the places we call Guatemala and Panama and Honduras and Mexico going all the way up to California. Because the Spanish ran California and parts of New Mexico and the places by Texas until the year 1848, by the time what they had what they call the Spanish-Mexican War. But that's neither here nor there. We're going to move on to back to what we were talking about. The Spanish used to take black people, hang them up by their fingers, namely their thumbs, and whip them until they couldn't sit there and whip them no more. The Spanish used to sit there and have their horses running around trying to sit there and kill the Arawak, the Taino, and the Carib Indians until the horses themselves got tired of running. This is the kind of thing that has been recorded in history. The Taino people, the natives that were in a place called Borocane, which we call today as Puerto Rico, used to take the Spaniards and used to sit there and put their heads in the water because the Spaniards came with the white Jesus Christ and said, look, this is God and I'm God because I look like this. So the Taino is recorded in history saying, well, let's see if you God, and I'm going to sit there and put you head first in the water. And if you die like I would die by drowning, well, can't be God. And so what wound up happening is the Taino used to sit there and be too rebellious against the Spaniards. You understand? And the Arawaks were either rebellious or were not able to physically be able to handle the work that was being placed upon them by the Spaniards. Cristobal Colombre, aka Christopher Columbus, you understand? He used to sit there, and if they did not get the quantity that they desired of gold, he used to take the natives and cut their arms off. Similar to the guy Leopold of Belgium used to sit there and do to black people in the Congo in the 1880s. You understand? And there's a book written called Scramble of Africa that gets into that. So we want to sit there and not try to make anybody sad or angry, but we just want to sit there and have this to be noted and understood. You understand? The native people that we see in the Spanish places like Mexico, the Arawaks, the Aztecs, and the people that was in there called the Olmecs and everything of that sort, a lot of them was to a great extent eliminated and destroyed by the Spanish people. A lot of the people in North America who were the natives were destroyed by the Spanish and by the English. One of the ways that they got for the guy to be put to death, one of the chief of the Native American people, and I have to ask, pardon me because of what I'm about to drop in the history here, in case there's children that's listening now or children that will be listening. The European man with his infectious herpes, syphilis, and smallpox masturbated his semen inside of blankets and threw it on the natives. And that's how some of the natives wound up becoming eliminated. The Spanish used to sit there and take, when they dealt with the natives, the women and cut their vaginas out and wrap it around their Spaniards' heads and wear it around as a trophy. They used to take people, lately like the people called the Apache and others, and cut their heads off and kick their head around like a soccer ball and so forth and so on. These are the atrocities, among others, that I'm going to speak on concerning what happened with the natives under the Spanish, concerning the black people that was under the Spanish. They used to sit there and take a woman, hang her upside down, and say, do you think it's a niño or a niña? Well, let's just cut the stomach open and see. And while the woman was hung upside down, will cut the woman's stomach open and say, oh, it's a niño, and step on the baby's head. This has been recorded in history. When you sit there and understand what happened with the Inca and with the people that was in the place that you call, if I remember the country correctly, in South America, with the Inca was in Peru, they used to sit there and have them all basically hung up by their necks and burn them underneath their feet and then have them cremated alive. These are the things and the atrocities that the Spanish and the English have done to people. Now, concerning the enslavement, they used to sit there and have a machine to open up your mouth during the slave trade with the slave ships, because a lot of the black people didn't want to eat food because it was either unclean like pork or they just wanted to starve themselves. So they used to sit there and pry the people's mouth open with a machine and sit there and force the food down their mouth. Or if you were to get a, not to be disrespectful, it's kind of a low-rated movie, but it's called Ill-Gotten Gains. And they sit there and show you in that particular movie how they used to sit there and scream to one another in the language that the people from Africa were talking and saying, don't eat, don't eat, don't eat, don't eat. Basically saying that you should starve yourself. And how the Europeans would sit there and come and break your two front teeth just so they can try to force food down your stomach. They used to sit there during the slave trade. And as the movie, the Hollywood-based movie called Amistad shows with the Spaniards, they used to sit there and whip people to the point where the people were unable to sit there and stand anymore. These are the kinds of things that wind up happening, and then some, that we're going to speak about concerning what happened with the Spanish, the natives, the Spanish. And when I say Spanish, I'm talking about the European from Barcelona and from Madrid. You understand? So this, like I'm stating, I want to continue to state this. I am not on YouTube trying to sit there and incite anger, disrespect, cause some kind of sedition or anything of that sort. I am simply noting the fact of the matter. And the fact of the matter is that in history, certain people have done certain things to other people that should not be forgotten. In the year 1588, the Spanish got very, very rich concerning the slave trade in gold, in silver, in merchandise. The slave trade made, just like the drug trade, made a lot of people dead and a lot of people rich. You understand? So these are the kinds of things that sit there and let it be noted and understood. Now, last time when we was able to show a picture, and you can sit there and Google this image if you care to, about the image of the slave ship. You had it to where the people on the top deck used to sit there and defecate on the people that's on the bottom deck. The average slave trip, because we're going to get into this later on in the lesson, but I just want to state this now and then get back to what I'm about to say later on as well then. The average slave ship trip went anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months. Depends upon how fast the ship was, how many people was on the ship, how much quote-unquote cargo was on the ship. Because when you get into other studies concerning the slave trade, in the 19th century, that is to say in the 1800s, they used to have submarines that used to sit there and carry as many as 1,000 black people as slaves coming from Western Africa. See, these are types of things that's been recorded in history that they don't really speak about. And I don't mean to sound boisterous or haughty or arrogant, but these are the types of things they don't really speak about concerning the slave trade and what really went down and what really happened. What we usually hear, and I know because I've heard it too, is 1619, 20 black people was brought over to Jamestown, Virginia. And then the numbers just gradually increased. But then there was only 5% of white people who were slave masters. They teach that in college, man. Don't tell me they don't, because I sat in there and sat under the class when they taught it. Now, it's not to get too personal, but as a brother who teaches in the college, I cannot teach when I'm teaching now inside that school. Do you know what will happen? Oh my goodness, he's trying to incite hate. I never said hate anybody. I distinctly said that, if you remember the last presentation on this, is that black people from the Caribbean and black people from North America need to get along better. I'm trying to incite love, not hate. What I'm doing is basically presenting the facts of what happened with us as a people and how they try to sit there and separate us on dark skin and light skin, on tall and short, on fat and skinny. Your hair is nappy. Your hair is straight. You got hazel eyes. You got brown eyes. Read the Willie Lynch letter. He said, I take these differences and I do what? Make them bigger. So when we sit there sometimes and think about the character of this European man, generally speaking, taking little differences and making them bigger than what they are. Then we look at, to get into the Kemet thing real quick, the Sigmund Freud issue in his book, Moses and Monotheism. Remember, taking little things and making them bigger. I think the Asiatics could have never been black people because they seem to be a little lighter in complexion than the people of the Kushite. So now you got, not to sound disrespectful, you got light-skinned black people asking other brown-skinned black people, oh, what color you think the Hyksos were? Dude, same color as you if you light-skinned, if you looking on that wall going to buy that. But see, these are the things that has been made to have us think us against ourselves and seeing each other through the eyes of somebody else who obviously does not like you, does not like your mama, does not like your papa, nor your little niño and niña that comes from your wife. So these are the things that need to sit there and be spoken about and understood. Brothers and sisters, concerning this kind of presentation and what we're speaking on, the Dutch used to sit there and take black people and hang them by their rib cages. The Portuguese used to sit there and put black people between two pieces of wood and turn it harder and harder to where your digestive tract begin to fall out of your system. These are the things that has been done to us as a people. So my point is this: if you know that you're guilty of something, you're always going to want to sit there and have those who you offended to get over it. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Just like, and to make it real, when I was a little boy, personally, and I was a thief, I didn't want the people I stole their little change from to remember what I did. I want to keep smiling in your face and saying, hi, I'm the little guy, Tayshawn, who took your $2 off your dresser when you wasn't looking. But that only shows you in spirit when you have done wickedness. And what gets black people, for any white people listening, not trying to sound racial, is all the people we're talking about are dead. The oppressors and the victims. But we are the descendants of the victims. And it's not as much as black people are trying to look for sympathy or compassion, but it just amazes many black people about the indignant attitude like, yeah, it happened, and so what? That's the thing that sits there and makes black people like, wow, y'all something else. So, continuing on in this presentation concerning this matter, we see the following in these recorded numbers. As against some 90,000 slaves shipped from all parts of Guinea to the New World in the 16th century, that is to say in the 1500s, the total figure for the 17th century, that is to say in the 1600s, is thought to be 2,750,000, or an average of 27,500 a year. So, we're speaking on these kind of figures, and they are very, very high in number. None of them being beneath 1,000. You can get a lot of work out of people having 1,000 workers. There was a man in West Indian Islands as a slave master who had over 1,000 slaves. Do you realize how much revenue you're going to be making having people work for you and you're not paying them? Ever so often, we see on Facebook a meme or on Yahoo News or so forth and so on. They speak about, let me just give an example to make people understand what I'm saying. Basim, brother, can I be heard?
Loud and clear, good brother.
All right, now I want to break this down so that way we can understand what's going on. Remember, you're not paying the people anything. They're sleeping in huts on dirt floors and so forth and so on. Oh, by the way, if a woman gave birth, she was expected that same day or the next day to return right back to the field. And by the time a child was 6 years old, you was also expected to sit there and be working in the field. Oh, another thing, my dark black people, not trying to sound Willie Lynch or whatever, there was people looking like Jasmine Guy. There was people looking like Sinbad that was in the field with the people looking like, let me just get a name, Wesley Snipes. See, because among black people, you got a dark and light skin issue, unfortunately. Oh, y'all were the house niggers and we were the field niggers. No, get your studying up. You had light skinned people in the field and there were dark skinned people in the house. See, this is what happens when we need to sit there and get our studying done. Now, one of the things I want to sit there and point out is that we see periodically a meme. And I know I bash memes, but let me just give you an example such as this. The guy who runs Dunkin' Donuts makes over $4,000 an hour, but he says paying somebody $15 an hour is insane. The guy who runs Walmart sits there and makes how much an hour? And how much do they pay their workers? Are we really serious? Now, not to get too personal, the average security company inside New York pays you anywhere, depending upon the amount of years you've been in there, depends upon your certification. They pay you anywhere between $9 an hour, only because they got to due to some kind of minimum wage and want to quote unquote be nice, from $9 to anywhere to $18 an hour on average. Now, people might say, yeah, that's a lot of money, making over 15, 16 an hour. But when you got transportation and you got children and you got rent and you got food and clothing, it's sufficient, but you ain't really coming out being able to, as the saying goes, have revenue after to do what you want to do when your day off. Many workers inside the United States today sit there and work and just chill with family in the house on a weekend. Not because they, quote unquote, don't want to go out with their family. It's because, as stated, with transportation and children and rent and clothes, and if you're in school yourself, you can't afford to go flying here and flying there and going on vacation, because the job is just that. And I'm not knocking employment, because it is necessary. J-O-B means just over broke. So all they did, let's go real, brothers and sisters, the 14th Amendment, only thing Lincoln did was sit there and change the form of slavery. And this is what made the white people in the South upset, because now they're saying, damn it, you're making us like niggers, going to have to sit there and work beside them, and now I got to sit there and pay for everything I used to get from them niggas for free. That's what the white man was upset about concerning the Civil War. He didn't want to sit there and lose his free economy. Now, the people who want to sit there and say, no, slavery was not part of the Civil War, get your studying done, because when you sit there and read about why South Carolina succeeded, why Virginia later succeeded, and why Texas entered the war, you sit there and see slavery as a cause for it over 24 times. So yeah, slavery had a lot to do with the Civil War. So let that be noted and understood. Now, one of the things to sit there, brothers and sisters, to point out in this presentation is this. Just like you see the meme and the people who are working for these wages, and the people who sit there and just go in Monday or whatever day you start your work week with the sad, regular face like I'm at a dead-end job, that's the same way our ancestors was going on the plantations. The only difference is they got a quote-unquote doctor that's supposed to be over next to them in the hut. Inside the school I work in, they sit there and they have a nurse that sits there and works inside the school there. Ain't really that big of a difference. That's why some people call it paid slavery. Now, one of the things to sit there and let it be noted and understood, and what I'm presenting here, is as stated, it's not to incite any violence, it's not to sit there and make any problems, it's not to sit there and cause any dissension. It's simply just to let it be noted and present the truth of a matter. All right, now, want to sit there and get into one more part in this book here. Black Cargoes, A History of the Atlantic Slave Trade, says the following. Even before the intensive cultivation of sugar began to exhaust the soil of Barbados, the plantation system spread to other islands, beginning with those in the Leeward chain, Antigua, St. Kitts, Nevis, Montserrat. Goes on to say in this book here, in the year of 1655, the English took Jamaica from the Spanish, and after some financial reverses in the early years, transformed the island into a collection of black plantations. The years of financial hardship were those with the local government tried to limit the importation of slaves in order to avoid the danger of uprisings. As late as 1673, there was only 95,000 forced slaves on the island, as compared to 77,068 whites. 7,768 whites, sorry. But it proved impossible to continue this cautious policy in view, here we go, I want to sit there and have this to be read. It says what? In view of the quick fortunes to be made in the cane fields. From 1698 to 1707, 42,572 slaves were shipped to Jamaica. So that means within 9 years, in a place called Jamaica, which is a big / small island, depends on how you look at it, from 1698 to 1707, 42,572 slaves were shipped to Jamaica and 34,583 to Barbados. And not long afterward, the slaves in Jamaica outnumbered the whites in the proportion of 10 to 1. Then, as even the rich Jamaican soil began to be exhausted in its turn, Haiti became the greatest of the sugar islands and did not yield its place to Cuba until the end of the century. So why am I going over, as a person born in the United States, the situation that we're talking about in the West Indies? Is because, as we stated last time, many of the people that was brought to the West Indies was also later reshipped over to what we call the United States. That's why. That's why when you sit there and see somebody say, oh, you look like somebody I met back in the West Indies, there's a reason for that. Because the father of the family was shipped to Jamaica, the mother to Antigua, and the two children was put in North Carolina. That's why. Oh yeah, and then the sister was resold after being raped to Virginia. And what I'm talking about came from a book that is a school reference that I'm not allowed to take out. So I just want to sit there and let that be noted that these kind of things here are recorded within history. All right, so let's continue on in our presentation. In the book here, entitled From Slavery to Freedom, we're going to go to page 72, all right, and speak about this particular matter that we're speaking on, all right, and it says the following. All righty. Almost 30 years later, and now what we're talking about, brothers and sisters, is speaking about in New York with the Dutch. We're going here for a reason. Bear with me. Thank you for the time. Almost 30 years later, in 1741, there was a rumor that an even larger insurrection. After a series of fires, the rumor spread that blacks and poor whites were conspiring to destroy law and order in the city and to seize control. After the city offered generous rewards for the apprehension of the conspirators, almost 200 whites and blacks were arrested and prosecuted. So they're saying in the year 1741, you had poor whites as well as black slaves that were conspiring together to sit there and take over the place we call New York. By the way, this happened in what we call New York City. All right, let's move on. And it says the following, that 200 whites and blacks were arrested and prosecuted. At least this gets into the meat of why I'm reading about what happened with the Dutch here. All right, pardon me, with the English and the Dutch. Because the English took over what we call New York in 1664. But as we remember from last time, the Dutch was still in there, just not in control as they were prior to 1664. It says this, at least 100 blacks were convicted, 18 of whom were hanged, 13 burned alive, and 70 banished. Banished to where? Could have meant sold to the West Indies, sold to another place, probably perhaps killed in such a way they don't want to sit there and describe it because it has an ISBN number in the book. Okay? It says what? 4 whites, including 2 women, were hanged. Why do I read this particular part about the white people that was conspiring with black people to take over New York during slavery in 1741? Because it distinctly says in that book we just read, it is entitled From Slavery to Freedom by Franklin Moss on page 73. It says that 4 whites, including 2 women, were hanged. That means they lynched 2 white women concerning this matter in the year 1741. Why does this become important? Because just like we was going over before, they tried to sit there, and when 1776 came, which is after the date of 1741, the American government set up under Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and so forth and so on, they try to wash their hands of what the colonists did. So you had, from 1741, recorded in history, 2 white women who were hung, who were lynched, right? Why is it then that they say the lady Mary Surratt, who was one of the conspirators with Lincoln to get him assassinated, was the first woman, or even some records say the first white woman, to be hung by the United States. While this thing happened with Mary Surratt in 1865, we're reading about two white women in 1741. Why am I going there even as a black man? Because I don't want to sit there trying to make everything seem racial. But one of the other points to make and let it be noted is how slick the records try to be and how they quote certain things. See, Mary Surratt, who got lynched in 1865, was under the government of the United States of America. These two white women in 1741 was under the colonists. So when they say in history that Mary Surratt was the first woman to be hung by the United States, they're saying it because of the way they created their laws to wash their hands of what they did prior to 1776. That's why I went into that. So it even shows, even with their own people, they will sit there and do that kind of thing. So my point is this: if we continue on in this presentation, it says 4 whites, including 2 women, were hanged. No more serious outbursts took place during the colonial period. The colonial period was ended as stated in 1776. Okay? And by the time the revolution, meaning that the American Revolution that they had that started in the 1770s and all of that, you may want to look up the guy Crispus Attucks, who died March of 1770. Okay? Says what? And by the time of the revolution, New York had begun to recognize the moral and economic undesirability of holding human beings in bondage. So that's something I wanted to sit there and point out in history. How they're going to say 3 white women that we just spoke of, Mary Surratt in 1865, hung by the United States people, and the 2 white women prior to the coming together of the United States in 1741 that were hung. See the games that's played? See, this is why I wanted to get into that, because if they're doing that with their own Caucasian women and their own sisters, then you know good and well that once it comes to the people that came first as quote-unquote indentured servants, in the same 20 people that was brought to Jamestown, Virginia, in their same lives, they was made from indentured to permanent. So we have to sit there and know and understand these kind of things for edification purposes. Now, if we continue on, brothers and sisters, concerning black people in New York, in the year 1710, it was illegal for black people to walk out at night without a lamp with a light in it at nighttime. In the Bronx, New York, there is a store that the people who run the store has a sign up saying, if you come in here with a hoodie, that is to say a sweater with like a sweater jacket with a hood to it, if you come in here with a hoodie, you will be deemed perhaps as a possible trespasser. This is in the Bronx. And I'm going to sit there and, for edification purposes, blow up the spot. The store is on East Tremont, as you go and take the 2 train and get off at East Tremont, walk down the steps, veer over to your left side, walk up the block, go across the street, turn to your right, and when you sit there and see all of our Dominican brothers standing outside, go to the store next to it, look to your left, and sit there and see that sign that says, oh, the sign saying, if you come in here with a hoodie on, you may be deemed as a trespasser. That's in 2015. All these curses shall come upon thee and shall pursue and overtake thee. Sound familiar, huh? Let's move on. I want to sit there for edification purposes. Go back to the book From Slavery to Freedom and read a part of it. It says the following. After the English came to dominate what we call New Jersey, they encountered slavery in every way. Pardon me. they encouraged slavery in every way. Now, remember, it said that the English dominating New Jersey. New Jersey became a colony by the English when we get back into the date of it, the same year that New York did. In the year 1664 by a guy named Lord Berkeley. And what is one of the famous colleges coming out of there? Berkeley College. Brothers and sisters, this man immortalizes he being a slave master. Why do you think they made movies like Butler and 12 Years a Slave? And when they show, to a certain extent, Black history, they show you movies with Denzel Washington and Jasmine Guy in the movie Glory and Roots, because he's trying to immortalize when they called the good old days, when they didn't have to sit there and barter with other nations, when they had it for free. When Lincoln, who was a two-faced dude, my goodness, the man was two-faced, because he said in 1858, I do not care to sit there and free the slaves. I do not care to sit there and encourage slavery. I just want to have it to where I save the Union. Now, when you get to your own time, refer to your own records and look up the situation, what they call Bleeding Kansas. Bleeding, B-L-E-E-D-I-N-G. Bleeding Kansas was during the issue in the 1850s because the northern states didn't want slavery to expand west. The southern states wanted to continue being the slave masters. So one of the things that the northern states was upset with Lincoln about, and on the down low happy with John Wilkes Booth, who blew his brains out about, is the fact of saying that when those niggers become free, they're going to be coming up here taking our jobs. See, that's one of the things that the North was also on the down low trying to fight against. So the North was not fighting for the preservation and the safety of Black people being free. Lincoln fired 2 white guys from being in a position that they were in the military when they freed Black people. One of the white guys' name is Fremont, F-R-E-M-O-N-T. The other guy, white guy's name was McClellan. McClellan freed the Black people in the state of South Carolina during the era of the Civil War. Lincoln put them back in slavery and got rid of the job from McClellan in history. The guy Fremont, the other white guy that Lincoln fired from his position, freed the Black people in the state of Missouri. Because if you remember, Lincoln became president in 1860. And in 1820, they had what they called the Missouri Compromise, where they would sit there and accept certain states and certain lands as slave states. You may want to look up the Dred Scott decision with the judge, the Supreme Court judge named Taney, T-A-N-E-Y. All these things is documented, man. This is why they try to make history seem boring. You understand? So, one of the things to continue on in this presentation, if we will, is this. In the year 1636, Rhode Island decided to sit there and spread her wings, so to speak, in the slave trade of our people. Brothers, sisters, I want to say in the middle of this presentation, because my spirit talking about this as a man of color is actually bothering me. You understand? Because it's kind of hard for me, not trying to be funny and not trying to sound sentimental, but like, not to be too personal, my daughter's middle name is Harriet Tubman. That's part of my daughter's name. Now, those who know Harriet Tubman was born in the year 1820, some say 1821, died in the year 1913. May she rest in peace. She's buried in a place called Auburn in New York. But one of the things to point out is when my daughter asked me, okay, her first name being Shalosha, the Hebrew word for three, and she asked me what is the meaning and the reason why she has two names in two different languages. So I told her, well, we in America, so you have an English name. We are Hebrews, so you have a Hebrew name. So she was like, oh, okay. She's still looking like, okay, whatever that meant. But mind you, she was 5 or 6 at the time. I want to say 5. She's a little older than that now. I'm going to just leave that business at that. And she said, so where did I get the name? If I'm saying that her name was Shalosha, and it is such, meaning 3, because the idea, not to get too personal, was she becoming in our life makes me, her mom, and her a unit, meaning we become 3. That was the point in naming her that. Now, she then asks, okay, if that's the reason with that, why is her name partly Harriet Tubman? Now, how do I explain to a 5-year-old black girl what happened with Harriet Tubman? While she got hit by her slave master and used to sit there and black out periodically. How she used to sit there, and when she did get married to a black man who was free, and tried to sit there and tell her husband that she was loved in and love with, baby, we can sit there and become free and get these other people and bring them to the north, bring them to Canada. And how her husband sat there and said, well, if you try to free these slaves, I'll sit there and tell on you. Harriet Tubman got her gun, looked at him in the kitchen, pow, blasted him. Shot him right there in the kitchen floor, right in Maryland. How do I tell that to my 5-year-old black daughter that Harriet Tubman, a name she partly has in her name, shot and put to death her own husband because he wanted to be a coon in a sailboat? Kind of hard to tell that to a little girl. You understand? The same lady who was a nurse inside of the Civil War. Oh yeah, and I want to say something to the Israelites. You understand? And I'm a Hebrew, I'm an Israelite, but let me say something to y'all Israelites who want to bash and bang on Harriet Tubman, talking about she was with the women's lib movement and didn't know her place as a lady. Y'all need to sit there and get y'all studying up correctly, because if you knew what happened, the Women's Association and Women's Lib movement that Harriet Tubman was about for black people. So that's something to sit there and let it be noted. When this particular thing was done, white women, like white people normally do when something is going on with black people, try to nudge their way up inside of there. That's what happened with that. Black Panthers, who try to nudge their way up inside of there? The white people. The Israelite camps, who try to sit there and periodically used to try to come around? White people. The same thing with the NOI, with the Nation of Islam, try to infiltrate that. What happened when Elijah Muhammad's son married a white woman and didn't allow them to come in? Then you see what they're doing now. Anytime you allow these kind of people inside of your organization, it don't seem to usually become too profitable. The Panthers, the NOI, the black people in the 1700s allowing the poor white people to help them try to take over. Segregation was not the worst thing. Now, let's move on, if you will. Brothers and sisters, I have a book here entitled The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas. Now, we went over this book last time, and giving a shout out to my brother Priest Danyala from the Lions of Israel on Maccabees TV, I actually showed this book cover. So for those who care to, you can look that up with that. But the book we're talking about is entitled The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas. We're going to go to page 117. And let's sit there and drop this situation right now and let it be noted and understood what we're talking about. Basim, brother, can I continue to be heard? Because what we're about to get into is nothing light.
Loud and clear, good brother.
All right, we're going to sit there and go here, and let's see what this says here. The most important merchant of Portugal concerned in the slave trade in the mid-16th century was Fernando Jimenez. Fernando Jimenez. You can look this up. I'm going to spell the name. Fernando. Jimenez. Jimenez. Fernando Jimenez, who, though based in London, had close relations living in Italy and others in Antwerp, Antwerp. Despite his Jewish ancestry. Here we go. See, this is something else that is not talked about during the slave trade in most cases. Despite his Jewish ancestry. Now, when we say Jewish, we want to sit there and let it be noted that the Jewish people, they were very, 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 very heavy in the slave trade. The Jewish people is heavy inside of what we call, brothers and sisters, the education department. I know it is like that in New York. You understand? Despite his Jewish ancestry, the powerful reforming Pope Sixtus V was so appreciative of his services that he gave him the right to use his own surname, Peretti, Peretti. Jimenez's descendants were among the largest contractors in Africa, above all, eventually, in Angola. See, because Angola was the place that was colonized by the Portuguese. Remember, we just read this guy's Jewish ancestry, because they too like to wash their hands. Like the American government try to wash their hands. Oh, we wasn't the colonists, see, ding ding. And the colonists is like, we wasn't the Dutch, see, ding ding. Let's move on. Says what? The Jimenezes were run close in wealth and influence by another new Christian named Emmanuel Rodriguez and his family, including Simon, a dominant figure in the trade from Cape Verde. Cape Verde. C-A-P-E, Verde, V-E-R-D-E. Now, I just want to sit there and have that to be noted and to be read for edification purposes. In history, you will sit there and know, brothers and sisters, that many of the colonists that came over in a place that we call like Boston and Connecticut and New Hampshire and Vermont and so forth, they were Jewish in most cases. Not all of them, but some of them. But they tried to also sit there and certainly wash their hands of the part that they played in it. But brothers and sisters, Sweden had a part in the slave trade. And then, of course, here's the people saying, well, there were black people that were selling black people. But you notice something when that statement is made? You got Jewish people in it, Spaniard in it, Portuguese in it, Dutch in it, English in it, Swedes in it, Italians in it, and Germans in it. Because the Flemish people out of Germany also was a part of the slave trade. Irish in it, because the Irish people were used to guide the slave ships. All of those people that we just mentioned have a land in their own culture, in their own language. But there is no language called black. There is no language called black, and there's no land called black, and there is no people by default then by called black. That is a generic term that was given to somebody by somebody else. Yes, for understanding purposes, I use that terminology in presenting the case. Just as much as I speak English, Walo Adabel Ibrit Basika Hazot, Lema'an Aniya Kol Nehebin. I do not speak Hebrew in this conversation in order that I may be understood. That's just using intelligence. You understand? So now, in this particular book, we're going to get into this man right here. Because, see, he always tried to sit there and play the middleman. Remember what we did on the Basim show with me and the brother Marty Hebrew in history. Because the Jewish man is not going to look for the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. They're not going to try to bring the Vatican up on charges. Because they know they was in cahoots with it. That's why when you talk to Jewish people about the slave trade, they really don't want to sit there and hear about it. Because it's like Mumra looking at his own reflection in Thundercats. Hineka, look at you. Mumra don't want to see himself in the mirror. Just like those who are guilty of what happened, they don't want to be reminded of it. Just like little boy me, Tayshawn, didn't want to sit there and be reminded. Did you sit there and steal my $2 when I wasn't looking? See, anytime you do something wrong, you don't like it when it's brought to your face. That's why it's important to make sure you live right. Now, I have a book here written by Henry Ford entitled The International Jew. Now, I want to sit there and get into this because this man always seemed to try to hide himself. I don't know what happened. End of your day, okay, let's see if you know what happened or not. It says the following. the motion picture industry, the sugar industry. Remember that, because remember, they were dealing with the sugar in the islands. The motion picture industry, the sugar industry, the tobacco industry. Sugar, West Indies, tobacco, as our people called it in North Carolina, in places like that's now called New Bern, which used to be the capital of North Carolina, and Charleston. Can you grow that tobacco? Let's see who's in control of the sugar from Antigua and the tobacco that came out of New Bern, North Carolina. The motion picture industry, the sugar industry, what I'm reading from is called The International Jew by Henry Ford. The sugar industry, the tobacco industry, 50% or more of the meat packing industry, including pork. Read on. Over 60% of the shoemaking industry. Most of the music purveying done in the country. They the ones who sit there and tell you gangster hip hop and call your woman the B word to sit there and get sales. The motion picture industry, all right? Most of the music purveying done in the country. Jewelry. Remember who sits there and runs even the thing that a lot of rappers used to go to that guy. His name was Jacob, the jeweler. Nas, the rapper, used to talk about it. Let's see who controls this stuff here, man. Jewelry, grain, cotton, oil, steel, magazine authorship, news distribution, the liquor business, the loan business. These to name only the industries with national and international sweep are in the control of the Jews of the United States, either alone or in association with Jews overseas. This is coming from, I just read the book, The International Jew by Henry Ford. Now, to give you a history with him, Henry Ford was trying to come out with the thing called the Ford, the car, the automobile, and everything, and he realized that somebody was trying to steal his invention. So he did a thing, and he hired investigators. And he came out with this book here entitled The International Jew, and he came out with another book called The Dearborn Independent. See, these are things that when they don't teach this in college, man. So sometimes people might be like in my inbox, because I ask people, what do you think about the presentation? Give me constructive criticism. Whoa, brother, try to work on this, or brother, try to work on that. I'm open to constructive criticism. You understand what it is with that? Because it's being blessed by the Most High doing a presentation to the children of Yah. So you're not representing your Shire, you representing and speaking for the Most High, through the spirit of the Most High. So you ain't representing yourself or a camp, you representing the words in history that's left behind for you to share with your people. That's why you ask people for enlightenment about what you're saying and about constructive criticism, because you need to know how to present yourself in a manner that you may be accepted in what you're saying. It's called tact. Okay? So now, in this thing right here, okay, going over, it says that these things are control of Jews in the United States or in association with Jewish people overseas. We read sugar, slave trade, tobacco, slave trade, cotton, slave trade, magazine authorship, news distribution. That's why when the so-called philosophers were speaking about them coming out of the house of the Danites and saying that they are from the 12 tribes of the house of Israel, scattered. And they also said that there were other Israelites throughout the world scattered beside them. The average European person went to Jewish people in the 1984 issue when they had what they call Operation Moses, when they airlifted thousands of people, the so-called philosophers, to Israel, and then they treated them bad, for those who know the history. Who are these black people saying that they are the Beit HaYisrael, or the house of Israel? Who are these people saying that the Habesha in Ethiopia is the house of Israel? How can you sit there and explain this away? They're in the oldest country in Africa that's never been colonized, Mr. Snilson. How are these guys saying that they are the house of Israel? Well, man, you better shut that newspaper down. So the Daily News didn't talk about it. The other paper, New York Newsday, the paper from Long Island, New York, did not really talk about it. The only paper that really harped on that was the New York Times, as far as New York State is concerned. I can't speak about the other states, but as an Israelite born and raised in New York, I remember all the Israelites talking about what would stop and talking about the Israelites and what paper was? Why is it that the Daily News is the newspaper that is sitting up there trying to bash the brothers from ISUPK? Well, the Israelites that you see speaking on 42nd Street with microphones have had their microphones taken away from them due to X, Y, and Z reason. You spoke about trying to make Israelites look bad, but you didn't speak about Israelites across the water who don't even speak against you like that. It says they control the newspapers, man. This is why ABC, which is Channel 7 in New York, that is, they will sit there and show a Jewish person who has a cut by their elbow with the blood without running and focus on that like, oh my goodness, can you see this guy is cut? Meanwhile, they don't sit there and report and show when they do to the people and the Palestinians when they sit there and bulldoze them over into the Mediterranean. Let's move on, people. If we will, when they get into this book here concerning the slave trade, we're going to go to page 196, go to a couple of more references, get into some notes, and conclude out. Same book here, Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas, on page 196. And here is what we read concerning this kind of matter. All right? It says this. It was also a place much used by North American colonists who brought all manner of things there, including slaves. They're speaking about the place called Barbados, right? Thus, in 1645, the young Reverend George Downing went down from Harvard as chaplain of a merchantman and wrote to his cousin, John Winthrop, still governor of Connecticut. Here we go. If you go to Barbados, you shall see a flourishing island with many able men. I believe that they have brought this year no less than 1,000 Negroes, and more. The more they buy, the better able are they to buy for. In a year and a half, they will earn as much as they cost. At this stage, North American slaves were still few, almost all of them obtained by purchase in the West Indies. So my brother from Barbados and my brother in Louisiana, stop saying you're a Bayesian while the other one saying you're an American Creole. We're one people that was brought over to different places in the Western Hemisphere. Now, let's continue on in what we're reading. Brothers and sisters, I want to go into a book that I did not use last time. All right? This book here is entitled The Negro in the United States. It is written by a guy named, I want to get the author's name at least, because unfortunately, and I do apologize again that I'm not able to show the pictures for some reason. But the book I'm reading from about to is a book called The Negro in the United States by Franklin Frazier, PhD, Professor of Sociology, Howard University. I acquired this book when I was a teenager. Okay, now, in this particular book here, I want to read page 87. And we're going to get into some stuff concerning this kind of matter right here. 3 important slave insurrections. Now, for anybody saying that slavery did not exist, why are they recording themselves as the slave masters who lost their slaves and so forth? We're about to read something very interesting about 3 particular slave insurrections. One of them is by the guy, Gabriel Prosher. The other one is by a guy named Demark Vesey. The other one is by the famous and most spoken of Nat Turner. But let's see what this guy, Frazier, in this book, The Negro in the United States, from Howard University, is this author. And let's see what this college author says. It appears from the scanty information available that the Bible was used to impress the Negroes that they, as the Israelites, could throw off the yoke of slavery and that God will come to their aid. I wish very badly I can show the picture of what I just read, but I'm going to post this for those who may be interested on Facebook inside my Facebook wall. My Facebook, for those interested, is Kashub Danite, Kashub Danite, Danite, Kashub Danite. I'm going to read the line that we just read. This is concerning the insurrection of what happened in the year 1800 under the guy named Gabriel Prosher in the state of Virginia. Okay, let's go on. It says this. It appears from the scanty information available that the Bible was used to impress the Negroes. This is why they told you to not read. We went over the issue of reading and the danger of not reading when we did our presentation last time, right? It appears from the scanty information available that the Bible was used to impress the Negroes that they, as the children, pardon me, it says that they, as the Israelites, could throw off the yoke of slavery and that God will come to their aid. Another part in this book concerning this matter, we're now going to speak about Denmark Vesey. It says the following. As a boy, he had been sold as a slave in San Domingo, but was returned to his owner, the captain of the ship, because he was considered physically unsound and was subject to epileptic fits. He was brought back to Charleston by his master, whom he served as a faithful servant for 20 years. After obtaining his freedom, he worked as a carpenter and was respected by the slaves as well as free colored people of Charleston. Vesey, V-E-S-E-Y, seems to have been acquainted with the successful uprising of slaves in Haiti, since according to the testimony of some of the slaves, he used the Haitian uprising to encourage them in their enterprise. Point in me reading this is because our people in Haiti, as pointed out in Maccabees TV before, was the first freed black people in the Western Hemisphere, right? He also has some knowledge of the principles of the French Revolution and was aware of the debates of Congress on the Missouri Compromise. Having such a knowledge, you see why they try to keep you ignorant, man? You see why in New York they had the world news going on at the same time as Rap City? You see why they try to sit there and give you BET, black entertainment television, and not black educational television? Because of people like Denmark Vesey. Excuse me, the nigga knew too much. It says what? Having such a knowledge, that because they try to keep you ignorant, right? He used every occasion to instill in the Negroes confidence and a sense of their equality with rights. According to the report, even whilst walking through the streets in company of another, he did not idle, for it was his companion bowed, for if his companion bowed to a white person, he would rebuke him and observe that all men were born equal, and that he was surprised that anyone would degrade himself by such conduct. So I just want to sit there and have that to be read. Now, this same author that we're speaking of, Fraser, in this book here entitled The Negro in the United States, concerning Nat Turner, here's what he says in part. Turner was a mystic who had found in reading the Bible what he regarded as a solution of the problem of Negro slavery. Why do you think they try to sit there and tell you, don't read about the book of Joshua, don't read about the book of Deuteronomy, don't sit there and get into that book? They knew exactly what they was doing when they kept that from us, man. You understand? And then when we got the right to read, what did they do? They had to then sit there and say, We got to make these niggas dumb. Soap operas for the women, cartoons for the children, sports for the men. I said soap operas for the women, cartoons for the children, sports for the men. You want to know what brothers is doing during the playoffs and the finals? Not the midterms and the finals for school. We're talking about somebody else dribbling the ball and shooting it inside of a hoop that makes more money than a man who sits there and runs into a burning fire to sit there and save their family cat. We're talking about an organization where a brother, and I give him much respect, who says Jordan is out his mind to sell his sneakers the way that he's selling it. He's just going to sell his for $15 because of what's going on in the hood with black youth. That's intelligence. They promote, and I love rap music. I'm not trying to sound holier than thou. Oh, you just talking about you don't know what it is, Yeshaya. Please, I'm from the same kind of hoods everybody else is from. So I do know what it is. And I love rap music. I love reggae music. You understand? But here's my point, not speaking of myself in this presentation. How is it that if you know the Bible, the leader is David, in one case, Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, and then in the northern kingdom, Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Timni, Omri, Ahab. Those were kings. Some of them good, some of them not good in character. The king is the leader of the people. How is it that Tupac and Biggie Smalls, who were musicians, have become the leaders of the people? Since when in the Bible did Asaph the musician, who was part of the psalmists, become part of the leadership of the people? Asaph, A-S-A-P-H. You can look that up in your Strong's Concordance. Asaph was one of the musicians in ancient Israel. He's not a leader for the people. He's a musician. Since when did people like Biggie Smalls and Tupac, who were entertainers, become leaders of the people? And not people like Thurgood Marshall. Not people like Jan Matzliger. Not people like the Latimer brothers. Not people like Solomon Northup. Not people like Nat Turner. Since when did they not become the people who should lead the people and who the people in one way or another should look up to a certain extent? But the man who sat there, and I'm not trying to hate on nobody because I'm not holier than thou, but the man who said, though he said, Tupac, may he rest in peace, said only God could judge him, in the end, the man, no disrespect, spoke about sleeping with Biggie Smalls' wife. That's called adultery. Talking about, I'm going to sit there and have all of y'all niggas murked. That's against the commandments of the Most High. And people was bopping their head to hit him up because the beat sounds catchy, but this is what has been pushed on us when we see strife between black men and black women and black women, black men and black women, and Hispanics and black people. That's another subject. That's the stuff that we sit there and see consistently pushed upon us as entertainment, man. That's not good. You understand? That's a very low quality state of a people. When the person who's in the studio making a song then becomes the leader of the people. No, David was the leader, then he also sang songs. The singer and the entertainer is not the leader. There's a role for everybody. But in our case, as a people, they try to make the singer and the entertainer become the role model. Charles Barkley is not a role model. Michael Jackson is not a role model. All right, so just want to sit there and let those kind of things to be noted. Now, continuing on, if we will, I have a book for edification purposes. And we're going to go into this and go in a couple more notes and then conclude out. The book I'm going to be reading from is entitled The Slave Community by John Blassingame. As stated, I apologize, I can't show the pictures. But the name of the book, and you can look it up on Amazon, I know because I've seen it on Amazon, is entitled, once again, brothers and sisters, and those listening, elders included, because I don't know, I just can't call an elder brother or sister. I got to sit there and address you different. That's just me, though. All right. The name of the book we're speaking of is called Slave Community. Let's go to page 74 and see what it says for edification purposes. Now, as stated, this was written by John Blassingame. Let's see what it says in part. Oluda Equiano, who was an Igbo. The Igbo people live in a place we call Nigeria. The Igbos also in time were taken to Jamaica. And as we always kept on reading, they went from West Indies to North America. Daddy Sharp, who many people in Jamaica call him Sharp, took 20,000 people of the Igbos that were shipped there in slavery, and their descendants, that is, and led a great revolution against being enslaved. So all you got to do is talk about the guy named Daddy Sharp or Sharp from Jamaica to anybody who knows what it is, and you will sit there and see the information confirmed. Oluda Equiano and Igbo stressed the similarities between some of the Old Testament customs of the Jews and those of his own people. He says in part, like, and I'm reading verbatim, like the Israelites in their primitive state, our government was conducted by our chiefs or judges. How come he ain't saying like the Egyptians? It talked about the Egyptians in the Bible, same Old Testament that talks about the Israelites. But let's see why he said his customs of the Igbo is like that of the Israelites. Let's see this. Like the Israelites in their primitive state, our government was conducted by our chiefs or judges. Deuteronomy chapter 16 says, Shofti was Shoftarim, judges and officers you shall appoint within your gates. By our chiefs or judges, our wise men and elders. Proverbs 31 speaks about the man that's listening to the elder at the gate. And the head of the family with us enjoyed a similar authority over his household. The book of Genesis says that Abraham will do what? Command his household. Let's move on. That's why they try to say Abraham don't exist. Because when you're dealing with that, you got to have a certain character of a man. And a lot of brothers ain't trying to be like Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Because they want to be niggas. So great men like that, oh, that ain't exist. Even the great men of slavery ain't exist because slavery ain't exist. I'm just chilling, done. Thou shalt grope about noonday, like the blind gropes about in darkness. Sound familiar, huh? Let's move on. With that which is ascribed to Abraham and the other patriarchs, the law of retaliation obtained almost universally with us as with them, meaning as with us Igbos, as with them Israelites. And even their religion appeared to have shed upon us a ray of its glory. How did this happen among the Igbo people when at the time the Igbo people were still being enslaved and carried as slaves? Did the Igbo people look in the King James 1611 version and say, oh wow, what the Israelites is doing is what we did? Or did they already know about being of the Israelites prior to King James writing, or pardon me, because King James didn't write anything as far as that's concerned, as far as King James authorizing it. Let's get the history straight. Pardon me for that one. It says what? The law of retaliation obtained almost universally with us as with them, and even their religion appeared to have shed upon us a ray of its glory. For we had our circumcision on the 8th day. Even when you go into that book, Hebrew Heritage of Black Africa by Jacobs is the name of the guy who wrote that book. You speaks about the Igbo doing the circumcision on the 8th day, like the Hebrews of old. For we had our circumcision. We had also our sacrifices and burnt offerings, our washings and purifications. Brothers and sisters, do you know that the word wash and clean is mentioned over 25 times in Leviticus? Rakatz is the root word for that. You shall wash your flesh in water. You shall wash all your flesh in water. And when a man goeth out, he shall wash his clothes in water and be unclean to the evening. So Yisrael, or Israel, the Israelites, were to be a very clean people. We were a very washed up people. Okay? Says what? For we had our circumcision, we had also our sacrifices and burnt offerings. Yeah, that's Old Testament for you. Let's move on. Our washings and purifications, and on the same occasions as they did. That's coming from this book here, The Slave Community, by John Blassingame, page 47. Pardon me, page 74. So we got Gabriel Prosser using the fact of saying that we are the Israelites of old, and use that as a way to get the people to incite against their enslavers. Why do you think they sit there and say that we are not the Israelites? Because they know who are the true Israelites. You see? Let's move on. I want to, for edification purposes, if we will, brothers and sisters, go into a book that is very, very rarely used once it comes to a historical aspect. But I'll use it. All right? And for those who are able to follow along, please do so. The name of this book here that I'm going to be using, Basim, brother, can I still be heard?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you for that, my brother. The book that I'm going to be using is entitled Roots. That is written by the author Alex Haley. And the reason why I want to get into this is because of the fact that a lot of times, a lot of people don't go into this as a source and reference. But, brothers and sisters, I would like to, all right, for edification purposes. And in the book of Roots, we're going to go to chapter 107. In my book version here, it is on page 771. All right? So that way we can gain an understanding concerning this kind of matter. This is concerning the situation after Kizzy done died, who was Kuta's daughter, and so forth and so on. And here's what we read. All right? Page 771. This is during the era in this book timeline concerning the Civil War. Says this. Well, I done, meaning I don't, I done care what these white folks says, declared Matilda. Master Lincoln, doing good for us, if he get them so upset. Fact more, I hear about him, sound to me he like Moses, trying to feed us children of Israel. Now, this is coming from the book Roots by Alex Haley, chapter 107. My version is on page 771, Alex Haley, Roots. According to this, and I went over this on Maccabees TV in the Library Challenge, us children of Israel, don't sit there and think that our people was totally oblivious, even in that aspect of who we were and where we came from. So, that's something I wanted to sit there and have read. Lastly, but not final, concerning this aspect here, I have a book here. It is called Black Culture and Black Consciousness by Lawrence Levine. This too was read on Maccabees TV, but I want to go over it again for edification purposes. Now, this is slave talking to a slave about other aspects of what used to go down, according to this author here. Even here, the slaves were often discovered by white patrols. Then they would rush and start whipping and beating these slaves unmerciful. Wes Turner of Virginia reported, and do you know what some of them devils was mean and sinful enough to say? And here's what he said that the slave catchers used to say. If I catch you here serving God, I'll beat you. You ain't got no time to serve God. We brought you to serve us. So much for our people in slavery being brought over as captives and even afterward being what we call atheists. Our people were not atheists, okay? We're going to sit there and show in this book entitled, as stated, Black Culture and Black Consciousness by Lawrence Levine. And I want to sit there and continue on in this book, and it says the following. Patsy Larkin recalled that on her plantation, the slaves would steal away into the cane thickets and pray in a prostrate position with their faces close to the ground so that no sound would escape. The book of Numbers chapter 16, it says that Moses and Aaron did what? Fell on their face. When you see the house of Israel praying in many cases, you see them in a prostrate position. Our people were not atheists, brothers and sisters. When you sit there, and I don't mean to sound racial or quote unquote sacrilegious, when you look at the white Baptist church, they don't pray in that fashion. When you see the Catholic church, they don't pray in that fashion. That's something that was already innate within us, to be humble before the creator of heaven and earth. That's why you sit there and see in Numbers in the Old Testament, in number 16, where it says, and Moshe and Aharon fell upon their face. Just like we read here. It says what? That they went to the cane thickets and prayed in a prostrate position with their faces close to the ground so that no sound would escape. Let's go on. We're going to read on, and brace yourself for this, what we're about to read. Now, this right here, what we're about to read, sit there and eliminates any idea of black people in their original state being atheists. This is why, even if you look in any African or Western Asian languages, you're not going to find a word for atheist, because the word atheist comes from the Greek word meaning without, and then they try to sit there and formulate a translation or meaning for it. That's to say, people who say that there is no God or there's no higher power. That's not the culture of any black people. As much as Israelites sit there for Israelite reasoning, talk about the issue with Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians who were black were not atheists. And if you don't think so, the Canaanites who were also black were not atheists. So even if you talk outside of black nations, outside of the Israelites, the Egyptians, God, Baal, was transliterated into Metuneta as Baal, because there's no L in Metuneta. There's no L in the hieroglyphic form. So therefore, that's why Baal of Canaan became the Baal of Egypt. The R, or what they call in the Metuneta, the open mouth R, is how they transliterate the Lamed or the Hebrew L into the Egyptian R. This is why Israel is Yisrael inside of what they call the Meneptah Stela. This is why the walls of Karnak has it as Israel in reference about the land of Yisrael, because there's no L inside of ancient Egyptian. You don't see, that's why when you look at all the pharaohs prior to the Ptolemies, none of the pharaohs in there had an L inside of their name, because it's not a part of the Egyptian language. But getting back to the point of what I'm saying is this, and that is the fact that even with the idols of Baal and the idol of Kadesh that the Egyptians got and incorporated to their pantheon, idolatry is bashed in the Torah. And I am in no way trying to condone idolatry. But one thing to be noted is that those black nations who were idolatrous were not atheists. Let's move on, because this right here is about to crack it all right there. It says this. For those who are following, I'm in a book, Black Culture and Black Consciousness by Lawrence Levine, saying the following. On a Louisiana plantation, the slaves would gather in the woods at night, form a circle on their knees, and pray over a vessel of water to drown the sound. The most commonly used method, in which the slaves had all great confidence, was simply to turn a large pot upside down. All the noise would go into the kettle, an ex-slave explained. They could shout and sing all they wanted to, and the noise wouldn't go outside. You know why? Because our people were beaten if we were praying. That right there comes from the book Black Culture and Black Consciousness by Lawrence Levine. So much for the people saying, using the Nation of Islam book and misquoting it on top of that. The secret relationship between blacks and Jews is how Israelites came to be saying that they were Jews. No. The Jewish man walks around with his Torah, with his Tikkun, Koraim, or with his Kumash, and he ain't trying to walk through Crown Heights. On the opposite side of Schenectady, all the Brooklyn people know what I'm talking about. He is not leaving and getting on the number 3 local train and going over from the place called Kingston Avenue. He's Jewish in Crown Heights, living on Kingston Avenue. Where's his mind at? Crown Heights, Kingston Avenue shows you the kind of energy they're trying to deal with. But the point I'm saying is, when he walks through Crown Heights with his Kumash and his Tikkun and his Talit on the Shabbat, he is not telling Dwayne on Empire Boulevard, he is not, all my Brooklyn people know where I'm talking about, he is not telling Shaniqua over by Utica that you are the true tribe of Judah. So it is impossible, knowing how secretive that Jewish people attempt to be, to try to sit there and then sit there and say that the Jewish slave masters is the reason why black people are saying that we are the true Israelites. That's not accurate. So let that be noted and understood. Now, brothers and sisters, we're going to conclude with some notes that I wrote concerning this kind of subject matter. All right? And we're going to be on maybe about another 10 minutes or so and close out. Let's go to the book, the college reference for the collegiate issue, From Slavery to Freedom, and we're going to go to page, brothers and sisters, 41. All right? And this becomes important concerning the issue that we're speaking of. Long before Sir John Hawkins inaugurated the English slave trade, merchants of that country, meaning merchants of England, had become interested in trade between Africa and the New World. Before the end of the reign of Henry VIII, Henry VIII is the father of Elizabeth I. Before the end of the reign of Henry VIII, traders from Brazil were developing relationships along the Guinea coast and along the Brazilian coast. So if you take what was just read about the English involvement in the slave trade prior to John Hawkins is noted because they had what they called the good ship Jesus. That was the personal property of Elizabeth I. And one of the things to be noted is that there was also a slave ship named King Solomon. What does that tell you, brothers and sisters? That they will sit there and take men of even of your own history and then try to sit there and wave it in front of your face. That's what that means. You understand? They ain't call it after their own people. Because the people who were the enslavers did not, like the slaves, said about them own selves as the slaves. We are the same people that was oppressed in the land of Egypt. There are slave records that speak of that. The European people do not like to talk about the Israelite enslavement in Egypt. Because when you look at the pictures of the Amu and read for your own self the Emperor Papyrus, the Brooklyn Papyrus, D5.1446, the Lehun Papyri, Lahun, and it speaks about the people who were the Khemnu, Khenmu, Khemnu, meaning slave in ancient Egyptian, and how their names were names like Menachem, names like Shifra. We went over that in Maccabees TV. Shifra is mentioned as a slave inside the ancient Egyptian record in the Brooklyn Papyrus. The same name is found in Exodus 1 verse 15. So no, nobody plagiarized from the record from Seneptisi and Sobekotep III. Why don't they talk about that? Why do they not talk about the fact of the people that were treated in horrible ways in the open? Why, when they talk about the slave trade, and when I was a student in college, before I got my bachelor's, the teacher asked, I would like to have a 2-page typed paper based upon anything of the following subjects. Why did that Caucasian teacher have the slave trade as one of those subjects? I got that paper back with a grade that said, wow. That's all he said. I wound up, blessed be the Father, got an A in the class, an A grade, but the point I'm saying is the teacher, I don't know if he knew those subjects. That's not even my point. Point is I, instead of writing 2 pages, and I still got it on my flash drive, I wrote 6 pages and documented everything I was talking about. I cannot teach this inside of a college curriculum because it's controlled. So to the brothers and sisters who might sit there and say, well, sounding like you're talking fast, or you're talking with passion, or you're talking with energy, is because of all the teaching that a brother can do. I can't really teach in the school the way a brother really wants to get down and teach with evidence supporting his stance, because you will be brought to the dean and you're new. You ain't got a master's. See you somewhere else in another school. Take care. Bye. So one of the things, just to sit there and conclude in these particular notes right here, brothers and sisters, I just want to run down the timeline. You understand? Is this. Scholars, that is to say people who was into the study of such, scholars state that by the time Cortez did what he did in the year 1519, that there were blacks already in the Spanish islands. As stated, the Spanish islands, not New Spain. There's a difference when you're reading in history about the Western Hemisphere between the Spanish islands and New Spain. New Spain basically goes from what you call Colombia going all the way up to Texas. New Spain, that is. We'll get into that another time, next month or something of that sort, with geography. Able to show pictures better, Father willing. New Spain, that is. The Spanish colonies, as we stated, was what we today call Jamaica, Dominican Republic / Haiti, which was then called Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. All right, so let's go on. The asiento, A-S-I-E-N-T-O. You'll see about that when you study about the slave trade. The asiento was a Spanish-oriented document stating that France and Britain, between the years 1543 and 1834, could trade in slaves in the Spanish islands. So just want to sit there and have that to be noted and stated. Now, getting back into this book here, From Slavery to Freedom, page 57 in part, says this: almost from the beginning, they transported slaves to Mexico or Mexico, Panama or Panama, Colombia, Peru, and Argentina. And from these points, the slaves were dispersed in all directions. That's concerning the asiento. So A-S-I-E-N-T-O. Look that up when you get the chance, all right? That could be some homework if you care to. The asiento was a Spanish-oriented document about the whole issue with the French and the British being able to sit there and trade our ancestors as slaves in a place that we today call Jamaica and Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola, or Dominican Republic / Haiti. In the year 1521, concluding this matter, Cortez, because remember, you was going to talk about the Spanish, right, from the last time. In 1521, Cortez conquered the Aztecs and formed what became what they call New Spain, north of Panama to the area of Mexico to California. New Spain was controlled by Spain, that is, until, as stated earlier, in the year 1848, when America won the Mexican-American War. And the president at that time was President Polk, P-O-L-K. And guess who was working in his house? You know it. Let's move on. In the year 1803, the Louisiana Purchase brought the largest part of the U.S. after defeating France. The president at that time was President Jefferson. Jefferson was noted as having 5 children from a black woman named Sally Hemings. Now, I don't mean to jump the gun, but what slave woman willingly gives her body over to her slave master? Alright, that's their president, but let's move on, man. In the year 1861, the Civil War broke out in America. In the year 1859 was when the last slave ship came to what we call the United States, long after the British law made it illegal in 1807. But then it was made legal again in 1853. So the last slave ship that came to America was in 1859. And the people that was in the Union Army used it to sit there and store weapons. The name of that ship was called the Wanderer. So I just wanted to sit there, brothers and sisters, and finally conclude with the time concerning this matter. Because a lot of times I spoke with the brother, much respect to the brother Mikael Ben Yisrael, and I want to conclude with this because the brother, not to blow him up on social media, he kept on talking about this picture going around. I'm speaking about my brother and my friend Mikael Ben Yisrael. And I kept on, every time he posted a picture online, I kept on following him and saying, brother, don't worry about it, because there's all kinds of references to sit there and disprove that picture that they're saying, oh, the people was brought there as workers. I have a book here entitled For Closing Out, giving thanks for the time to the Most High. May the Most High bless the brother Basim for even having a heart to do such. This book here is titled Black Cargoes, and we're going to go to page 117 and see what this guy named Falconbridge, Alexander Falconbridge, said in his own diary concerning the slave trade and how he personally felt and what happened. I have frequently seen them faint through heat, them being the black people. I have frequently seen them faint through heat, the steam coming through the gratings like a furnace. Falconbridge gives one instance of these sufferings. Some wet and blowing weather, he says, having occasioned the portholes to be shut and the grating to be covered. Fluxes and fevers in among the Negroes ensued. Do we know what a flux is? You ever seen Concord? You ever seen the results of syphilis? You ever seen of what happens when you get bed sores and your body just winds up deteriorating and you're sitting there for a day after day and not being properly washed? And then all of the dirt goes inside through the man's urethra, through his hole in his penis, which is a very sensitive part of a man. Let's see what happened according to this guy right here. It says the following, right? It says fluxes and fevers among the Negroes ensued. The fever is coming because the body is trying to heal itself, so it raises its own temperature to burn out the infections, right? While they were in this situation, I frequently went down among them till at length their rooms became so extremely hot as to be only bearable for a short time. But the excessive heat was not the only thing that rendered their situation intolerable. The deck, that is, the floor of their rooms, was so covered with the blood and mucus which had proceeded from them in consequence of the flux, that it resembled a slaughterhouse. Numbers of the slaves having fainted, they were carried upon deck, where several of them died, and the rest, with great difficulty, were restored. It had nearly proved fatal to me also. The climate was too warm to admit the wearing of any clothing but a shirt, and that I had pulled off before I went down, notwithstanding which, by only continuing among them, meaning the slaves, for about a quarter and an hour, I was so overcome with the heat, the stench, and foul air, that I nearly fainted, and it was only with assistance that I could get on deck. The consequence was that I soon after fell sick of the same disorder, which I did not recover for several months. Not surprisingly, the author of the book now says, not surprisingly, the slaves often went mad. Falconbridge mentions a woman on a slave ship named the Emilia, who had been chained to the deck. She had lucid intervals, however, and during one of these, she was sold to a planter in Jamaica. Now, when it says a planter, it's talking about a slave master. Men who went insane might be flogged to death to make sure that they were not malingering. Some were simply clubbed on the head and thrown overboard. That's what happened with us, recorded in history, with our ancestors. So, just want to sit there and let that be noted. With that, I turn it over to the brother Basim, and thank you, brother, for the time. Shalom.
Thank you, Kashub historian, good brother. As you guys know, that was part 2 of his lesson and lecture on the American and African slavery and the history involved with that. And I'll put the description and the titles and authors of the books that he touched on in the description, video description, when it uploads to YouTube, so that anybody else can check those sources out. So, appreciate everybody tuned in live. Keep watching the channel, subscribe to the channel. I'm sure there'll be some more lessons and discussions on some topics that you'll find very interesting. So once again, thank you, Kashub. With that, we say grace and peace to everybody, and shalom, shalom.